from Sodexo Accelerator. So Ankur started the whole Sodexo Accelerator in India. That was the first Foodtech accelerator from India. And we'll discuss about his journey, his experience about starting the Foodtech Accelerator. But before that, Ankur, if you like to give a little brief about yourself, your journey, your professional journey, and then we can kind of get started.
Sure. Thanks, Rajiv, for inviting me to share some of my learnings with everyone today. And I'm really glad, I'm really glad to be talking about Sodexo Accelerator because it has been one of a steep learning curve in my career overall, and I love to talk about it. And I use the experience every day as I work with more corporates and startups in various domains, not just in food tech. So good afternoon, good afternoon, everyone. And just a quick summary from my profile would be I have about 10 years of experience working largely within marketing roles, and I'm a computer science engineer and a marketing postgraduate. So I've been working in the marketing domain. In the last 10 years, I've worked with companies like Amdocs, Godrej, and Sodexo in the past. While I've been working in marketing, because of my technology background and the technology bent of mind, inevitably I've been pulled in some technology projects. So the key domain for me where I have focused on most part of my career is the blend between the marketing and technology, and that's probably now I think with the evolution of that subject, it's consumer behavior and design and stuff like that. So that's largely about me. I think last 4 years I've been with Sodexo. I've enjoyed every day of it, and the challenges in the role. Most recently, I've moved from India to Ireland, and I continue to work with Sodexo more in a consultative capacity, in a very different role than before. So I have been working in the digital transformation role before, and now I'm working in a role where it's more about technology adoption globally than bringing in new technology partners or so. So yeah, I think we will talk more about it, but yeah, I think that's broadly what I am doing right now in my career.
Great. That's great, Ankur. So what we will cover maybe in the next half an hour. So half an hour we'll have a discussion, and then we'll open up for more like an interactive. We want it to be more interactive. So half an hour we want to cover about the food tech ecosystem in India, particularly and globally, because you see the global ecosystem also. We'll also talk about a little bit about open innovation and how corporates and startups are working together. What are the best practices? And maybe we can get started with your journey about starting the whole Sodexo Accelerator in India, right? So how did it kind of got planned, and how did you get started? What are the roadblocks? So if you can just give a little brief about that.
Sure. So I think it's interesting. So Sodexo Accelerator was sort of not started because we wanted to create an accelerator. I think it was born very organically from the key challenges and the problems that we were trying to solve. And Sodexo is kind of market leader in India in food services, has been so for past more than a decade or so. Most recently, of course, like all other companies, and then I'm still talking in terms of pre-pandemic, before COVID kind of situation, because that's when the accelerator started and the ecosystem was quite different there. So Sodexo was anticipating some of the challenges in the corporate catering business because of the disruptions in the food model in terms of the corporate food business or the corporate catering business per se has largely been driven by the captive audience, like there are X number of employees which are in the office. And a food service provider like Sodexo or any other needs to cater to the employees' need in the office in terms of their food, whether it is the breakfast or the lunch, or even in sometimes snacks and dinner. And that has been the business for a very long time. There's a captive audience and there's a food service provider, and largely the captive audience would go with the food service provider within the premise. But with the advent of the food tech in general, the outer ecosystem, which is not probably the corporate food tech ecosystem, this model we were anticipating could be disrupted, and large number of audience would want broader choice per se than just what is available in the cafeteria, a better experience than probably standing in queues and waiting for hours for their food. So the external ecosystem shaped a lot. The external B2C ecosystem shaped a lot the corporate food ecosystem, and that's where we thought, what is the right thing for a corporate like Sodexo to do in this situation is we could probably think of that this is the best thing to do, and let's create some solution and let's change our model and adapt to this new reality. But I think the more we got into the problem, the more we learned that because the market is so fragmented, the disruption is happening in the multiple angles. Why don't we work with the startups to first learn what is happening in this space? And I think that's how Sodexo Accelerator was born. The primary objective was to learn how the food tech ecosystem in the corporate is shaping up, and I'm talking about 2018 and 2019. And based on that, can we help some startups or identify a few partners who we can onboard, and then work on accelerating that innovation, which is already happening in the space. So that was the thought, and I think to large extent we were able to achieve our primary objective, and we learned a lot with working with some of the key startups in the space. And till date we are working with some of the startups that we that we brought in at the time of.
And that's great. So from an industry perspective, so Sodexo works in multiple kind of verticals, right? In the education vertical, then hospitals, right? Then corporate offices. So where are you seeing the maximum disruption happening? You said that the D2C ecosystem in India, the growing D2C ecosystem is disrupting. So where exactly is the maximum disruption happening?
So we saw across various spaces, like between corporate, hospitals, schools, and remote locations, etc., that we serve as Sodexo. We saw that the maximum disruption was happening in the corporates. That is why this accelerator was focused more on corporates. But if I have to pick a close second, it would be education. So in the education space as well, where we see students in the campuses, where students are also like a captive audience for the food service provider for any food services that are being driven by, let's say, the institutes per se. So they're usually the captive audience, but not anymore, right? Because students are also bombarded with tons of choices, and they also their behavior is also evolving based on the new applications or the new technologies that they are exposed to, and the new experience that they are being provided by other food tech partners outside their campus. So that has to all blend in with their experience that they are having in the campus, right? So one quick learning, if I may share, whether it is a campus for students or a corporate office or a corporate park per se, the experience or I would say the expectation that as a consumer that I have could be shaped by the ecosystem that I'm in. So the expectation is usually not the same. If I use certain technology and I get certain type of experience while ordering, let's say, grocery or food at home, that expectation was not the same when I was ordering food in the corporate. When it all began, But now I think both these experience and both these expectations are coming together more and more, and the uh, let's say the employees or the students or any audience that is within a hosted by an institute or an entity, any audience that is hosted by them has much more evolved expectations from the entity.
Okay. And if I can ask you, what I remember, like almost 3.5, 4 years back, is I think you started with around 6 use cases, right? If I'm not wrong, around 6 use cases where you scouted for startups and you partnered with startups. So, are there any
Yeah.
success stories in any of those use cases which you can share in the forum?
Sure. So we started with various use cases as you mentioned, and then we said, okay, because the primary objective is learning, so we identified the 6 ways in which this whole ecosystem can be enhanced, or this ecosystem could also be disrupted in some ways. And these use cases were very simple in terms of ordering applications and probably logistics tracking, or for example, food vending, so on. I think one use case that got very good traction was vending, and smart vending, as we used to call it. And smart vending is a combination of ordering food from your mobile applications and being served food, which could be hot or ambient, within the space that I am present in. And the use case per se was that how do we extend, for example, how do we extend the area of, so as let's say as a food service provider, uh, let's say in a captive audience and in a captive space like a campus or a great food service provider is given a dedicated space where they will operate and provide food services to the audience. Uh, and there is a specific time in which we would do that service, because there is a specific time during which the audience comes to the campus and they will be available to have the service. But the food service provider can provide services at a time where most of the audience is available, not usually not 24. So the two key objective in this use case was how do we extend the area of service. For example, if I am present in one building and it's a campus with 4 buildings, how do I extend my area of service to all the other spaces uh, through vending? And two was how do I extend the number of hours that I provide to the audience. So we could, and I think that's why it was a very beautiful use case, because with the existing technology that exists in the market for a very long time, and a very mature use case that is there in most Asian countries, not just Western countries. In India, the adoption of vending was not so much. And we as a company, we also had some learnings in the past that, how and when does it work as a use case of vending as a use case. But I think working with some of the companies, emerging companies, like Dalchini was one of our incubating company in the in the vending space, and we definitely learned a lot. And we not just learned in terms of how this ecosystem works, but we also learned in terms of what would it take to grow this ecosystem 100x. Because that's where the adoption of vending. And while we are just one player in the overall ecosystem, and we know that most other technology or most other food service providers are also dealing with similar challenges, primarily around food safety and logistics. I think that piece of the puzzle is, I would say, uh, is the most nuanced piece in this space. But I think other than that, the ordering experience and giving the ambient food and the hot foods right out of the vending, I think some of these use cases that we worked, which were quite successful in our space.
Got it. And a very obvious follow-up question, that with COVID kind of taking charge in a virtual environment, how is the relevance of facility management, and what are the use cases that you are looking at in a I will say a permanent or a semi-permanent COVID world, right, where you are a virtual kind of a hybrid work culture? Then what kind of use cases do you see in the facility management and food tech space?
So I think facility management has become even more important in the space after COVID. So for various reasons, that for example, much more attention is now being provided to the spaces in terms of the safety and compliance, and I think that's where mature partners like Sodexo add a lot of value to to the spaces that we work to provide services, being much more safety driven, being much more compliant, and creating that confidence among employees that whenever, not maybe not every day, but whenever they have to come back to office, they come back with confidence, right? So that's purely from a service point of view. But in terms of use cases, a lot of new use cases as we see are emerging, both in facility management as well as food tech. In facility management, I think primarily the use cases are driven by the flexible workspace, as we call it. So workplace experience is emerging as a one big area within this space. Like a service provider like Sodexo wouldn't have solutions to directly engage with the employees of the client, pre-COVID, or even if it was not so mature use case. But now a facility management company or a service provider like Sodexo is expected to have right solution in the place wherein it can provide, let's say, the right workplace experience to the employees in terms of if they have to book a particular facility, if they have to inquire, if they have to ask for services, right? So all of these interactions, like a bi-directional interaction between the service provider and the employees, earlier were just driven by an intermediary, which is called an admin department. But now this is much more direct, and now the bridge is being built by the technology, and that's where we see this space becoming much more exciting by the day. And we are excited to still continue to to evolve in this space, and these use cases are probably new and are getting matured by the day. But yeah, I think the space is getting very. And sorry, in terms of the food, even for the food, the space is very exciting because as we mentioned that earlier our mindset was that an audience which is working out of the audience needs diverse choices and not just from a food service provider available within the cafeteria. And I think now most of the audience working from home, how do these food service providers still provide relevant services to a person working from home by, let's say, broad set of choices and facilitating ordering and handling logistics, and then still being able to provide a solution that makes available a food that is safe, a food that is compliant. And I think that's where the key challenges, and that's where the key opportunity.
Got it. And so moving from use cases to how do you collaborate with startups? So what is your model of collaboration? Do you give a paid pilot? Is it more of a venture clienting model where you take the startup as a client, as a vendor, and then you package a solution, give it to your client, or it is more of a co-creation, or you invest in startups? So what's the kind of model that Sodexo Accelerator follows?
Sure. So I'll talk about the model that when we started the Accelerator, we had a very clear vision in mind that we want to work with, let's say, very early to sort of early stage companies in the space where we identify certain use cases, and then we will facilitate. We will identify the right partners. We'll facilitate a pilot with them, which is obviously a paid pilot, not a free pilot, a paid pilot in that space. And then based on the partners that we work with and have successful pilots, we might go into, let's say, a more advanced partnership, which could be, funding from the venture arm that we have as Sodexo Ventures, or which could be much deeper multi-year contract that will help the startups indirectly, right, in gaining more business, because now they are working with, a large service provider like this. I think. And our learning has been that, like, when an enterprise or a corporate like Sodexo would work with certain startups, there are certain let's say, challenges that both on the side of startup as well as startup. So I think one key challenge that let's say a corporate has in terms of how can we go and work with these early stage companies and stay compliant for our clients and the entire ecosystem. And that's where one of the key challenges from the corporate starts. And what we have, identified over the time is that a very early stage startup will be, like let's say a pre-seed kind of startup, and sometimes a seed stage startup finds it very difficult to work with a corporate because they are still figuring out what's the use case. They don't have a product market fit. They are still working on their technology, and that's where it becomes a little bit challenging. What we identified as an outcome of the accelerator is that a startup between seed to Series A, where they have at least an MVP, which they are tested with a couple of clients, works best for corporates as well as startups, and that's where the scaling up happens, and that's why the accelerator, right? So earlier we were almost, and I would just admit it, that we were almost not so clear in terms of the incubation and the acceleration part for the startups. But now I think with the learning, it is very clear that we are not in the space of incubating a startup where we help them figure out what is their use case and what is their base technology. But we are much more in the space of acceleration where the technology and the use case and the MVP is now figured out. Now we can help you grow, by letting you work with our clients, and we open up the client base that we have. And then, because that you can work with us in terms of a pilot, then you can get accelerated with respect to the other client base. And of course, providing handholding in terms of the various subject areas that the startup is working on in terms of their financials, in terms of scaling their product, etc. So those handholding you always used to, right? But we identified that acceleration means slightly different from incubation, and then and that has informed over the years, that has informed our selection of partners, as we work with more startups in this space.
Got it. So maybe, so if you can just tell us a little more about if a corporate is wanting to start any corporate accelerator to engage with startups, or specifically on the food tech space. So based on your learning, maybe some quick bullet points of what not to do and what to do. Maybe some bullet points will really help some of the audience here.
Okay. Yeah, I think difficult to list down like some key magic points, but I think I always used to say this, like an accelerator in an accelerator, a corporate and a startup are like two partners, more like married partners than business partners, because you have to invest your energy every day to keep that relationship alive until you get used to that relationship, and then both of you are happy at some point of time, right? So the resourcefulness of a corporate having the right resources, and the agility of the startup, right? They are agile and they can bring in new technologies, and they can bring in and cover the new. And I think bridging them both together, it's obviously not the easiest of the task, but I think that's where the learning is, that we can't, let's say, we can't take for granted. Once we onboard and identify the startup, this work every day for at least next 1 year, and that's where the life cycle of the accelerator comes in, and you have to handhold the startups through the entire journey, every day of the journey. And if as a corporate, if we are not let's say ready yet, and what happens is that we as Sodexo, we identified that we may not have the management, the leadership may not have the bandwidth to do that by themselves, right? And that's why we had an external accelerator, an established accelerator that we worked with in the space, who brought in the extra hand and the extra resources to enable this relationship. Like it's as much like a counselor that's sitting between two parties and making the relationship work. And that really helped us. I think that is something that probably most companies are working on that model now, having a third party facilitating this relationship and not just completely internalize this accelerator bit from a corporate perspective. That really helped us, and I think that's the problem that we identified very early on in the journey. And what not to do, I think this is more to do with the kind of innovation the corporate is trying. But I think one learning, as I shared for us at Sodexo, is that clearly identifying if the startup partner requires incubation or acceleration. Right? And a very early stage company, while it is very tempting to work because the use cases are very interesting, right? Because they're working on a very disruptive model. The startups are working on technologies which may not be, which may be very, let's say, exciting to work in the space. But if we are committing to the startup, I think we need to be very clear if we are ready to invest that additional resources or additional energy or additional bandwidth to make that technology even viable in the corporate space. Because I think that's where most relationship break, because it's very interesting and exciting in the start, and then we figure out the disillusion curve is typically that okay, this is not working, and why are we even working together per se. I think we have to, if we anticipate a little in that area, I think that helps in building stronger relationship with the startup from day one, rather than discovering something in the middle per se. The third thing I will say in terms of a little bit of due diligence goes a long way with the startups, because startups are trying to wing with their wing it with the resources that they have, and probably sometimes it is a little bit of over promise in terms of what they would do, which is genuine in terms of their intention, but they may not have the right resources to deliver it. And I think a little bit of due diligence in terms of not just in terms of their technology platforms, but also in terms of in terms of their teams and the availability, and sometimes there are shared teams in startups. So there are a lot of things that you discover on the way, but I think a little bit of, as I said, due diligence and then working with the startup helps a lot. For example, I used to spend at least 2 days in the office, working with them in the challenges that they're working in the day, and what are the resources that they have, and what is their plan. So not linking to the accelerator, but purely as a guide to the startups, that if you can spend some time with them, deep diving in the problems that they have, you will understand if the new challenge of them working with you, is that a challenge or an opportunity for them. I think that is that's probably another learning that I would say goes a very long way.
Got it. So again, kind of coming back to the topic, which is the changes in consumer behavior. We touched upon that a while, and now we will open up for a more wider discussion with the audience also here. So, so when you talk about the changes in consumer behavior in the food tech space, right? You spoke about D2C is changing the consumer behavior. Maybe health. People are getting more conscious about their health. Is changing the consumer behavior. What are the other areas where you see that the consumer behavior is changing in the food tech space? From your personal angle and also from the angle of Sodexo Accelerator?
Sure. So I think largely from a corporate or an accelerator point of view, but I would say that the consumer experience in the corporate space or in the accelerator space is being driven by the consumer behavior, which is being provided by players outside of this ecosystem, right? And I would say that while there is a lot of innovation happening, but it is like innovation that is being adopted from the core B2C. And it's not always about the consumer expectation, and I think that's where a lot of companies have gone to extra mile to provide an experience that is beyond from a consumer perspective in the B2C space. But once you go beyond expectation in the B2C space, you have to go to and meet that expectation now that the consumer has developed even in the B2C. So obviously the biggest factor right now is in terms of in the post-pandemic world, the safety and the confidence that the consumer demand now in terms of what's the protocol that has been used. We talk about a lot in terms of not just in terms of the end product, but the entire value chain, where the food has been sourced and what protocol has been used to, to produce that or cook that food, and what logistics have been used to deliver it. So I think the expectation now is probably more more than just the end product, but it is about the entire value chain and giving the visibility and control in the hands of the consumer in terms of if they need to understand the complete value chain of food that is served in the bowl to them, they should be able to, right? If not, for example, made available very clearly at a click of a button, then consumer should be able to investigate in some ways to see that, okay, can I go and check out what are the protocols that are being used in the production? Can I see from a logistics point of view what was for example, who was my delivery partner, and was he vaccinated or not, or was his temperature monitored or not in the recent past, etc. So I think all of these things are going much beyond than the original set of expectations that we started with. But I think that's the way that our world has now been shaped, and then it will continue to get enhanced in that area.
Got it. So according to you, the traceability of the whole thing is very important. So my last question before I open up. So we see in India and in Southeast Asia a lot of cloud kitchen. Some of them are calling it the ghost cloud kitchen. So when these cloud kitchens are kind of getting created, how does one kind of keep that whole safety angle and traceability angle? What kind of use cases do you see in the cloud kitchen space?
So cloud kitchen is of course a very interesting use case in the food tech space, not just in B2C but also in a B2B space per se. And the use case probably may not be very consumer centric. It is consumer centric, that it is providing that additional reach for the consumers. And wherever let's say wherever in any area there is a gap of a service or a specific cuisine, a cloud kitchen can be quickly set up to meet that demand in that area. And that's how the whole concept of cloud kitchen emerged, that you don't need to set up a restaurant per se to deliver or to meet the needs of the consumers in that particular area. But it's a very interesting logistics use case in terms of how you can probably produce the same quality of food that you produce in probably in a 5,000 square feet facility to now a facility which is barely 500 square feet. And now we see from a cloud kitchen perspective, the multi-brand cloud kitchens are coming into play, where from one single cloud kitchen, there are about 5 to 10 brands that are being serviced. And I think with that logistics, logistics as a use case in terms of how do we bring that large facility, which is probably in the in specific areas or the outskirts, to more dense areas wherein which is high real estate cost, low availability, very stringent safety norms in the residential areas, etc. So there's a lot of complexities around planning that model, and sometimes hub and spoke model works. Sometimes sometimes the what do you say now in terms of the frozen food also is becoming most popular in this area, because the food is not even just produced in a hub which is outside the city. The food is produced in a distant town in a factory, which is then brought into the cloud kitchen to to make it ready to be served. The surprising part is probably the food that is being served, which is manufactured in a factory, and then being served to the consumer with the help of this cloud kitchen is probably more safer or more compliant, and sometimes even than we originally thought. We have a conceived notion that the food has to be prepared fresh and right there before we serve to the consumer. But I think with the advent of technology, and not food technology, not in terms of digital technologies, but also in terms of how we treat food and how we manufacture food per se, not just probably in the kitchens but also in the factories. I think that technology is shaping the way that we can use logistics to get more closer to the consumer, and just make like last mile delivery through a cloud kitchen, rather than preparing from first principles, that you source everything and then you prepare the whole thing from up. I think the production model and the logistics model in the cloud kitchen is very interesting, and I think that's where a lot of countries, and especially in India, where low availability of real estate in the dense areas, and the high safety compliance rules, this every day the cloud kitchens are big challenge, and they are innovating in a very fast pace. And to tap that trend as let's say as an accelerator focused on corporate, or let's say B2B space, to tap that trend that is happening in the B2C area, and get the learnings and then be able to leverage the innovation in this. I think that's a very emerging, I think even the focus area for a lot of companies.
Got it. That's great. So now I think we'll open it up for the audience. If you guys can just unmute yourself, ask your questions. We can have a very interactive discussion. Please unmute yourself, and you can ask your questions. And others, if you want, you can just type your questions, and I will ask it on your behalf. So,
hi, am I audible, Rahul?
Yeah, Sujit.
Hi, Ankur and Rahul. Good
Hi,
evening.
Sujit.
Nice to see you. Okay, so I have one question, Ankur, especially when you talk about the Sodexo Accelerator with the Foodtech QnA food startup. Do you think that the corporation going to get some kind of a price benefit since there is a lot of less overhead cost by this accelerator program? Do you think there is any possibility that a corporation get benefited by this in overall pricing? And how then Sodexo will be able to leverage the profitability or the bottom line in such acceleration?
Sure. So I think in the B2C space, largely the price advantage comes from the scale. And yes, let's say if Sodexo is working with a startup and is able to provide a scale which is probably larger than the startup working with this one client for providing X amount of food services. If for example, a company A working with a client has to provide 100 meals per day, and if, for example, now they are working with Sodexo, they can work with 10 such clients and provide 1,000 meals per day. And obviously, the price advantage comes with the scale, and that price advantage can be then passed onto the client, and some part of the profitability can be retained by the startup and Sodexo, etc. So I think that is where working in a combined fashion always helps, that it provides you the ability to scale better and hence compete better in the ecosystem, which is very price competitive.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Sujit, for the question.
You.
So anybody else, any questions? I have a follow-up question on Sudeep's question while, Mark, please go ahead. Then I will ask my questions. Please.
Hi, thanks. I think I come from a different market to everybody. I was looking on your website and there's no little circle in the African continent, which happens to be the biggest continent. So I come from down south in South Africa. We have a different problem and solution at the same time. In very large industrial environments, mining being the key one that we're looking at, you have 3,000 employees changing shift all within a 30-minute period, and they run 24 hours a day. So you've got 3,000 going in at 6 to 6:30 in the morning and 3,000 coming out between 6 and 6:30 in the morning, which happens to be breakfast time. So we were looking at how to create a corporate food process to feed that volume in a very short space of time, hence smart dispensing, which is what you've been speaking about. But we went right to the 100% completely automated, but a simple solution where you say, I want 50 grams of oats, and the dispenser spits out 50 grams of oats for your breakfast. So we come from, like I say, it's still corporate, but it's a completely different market to, I used to work at Ericsson in the corporate space, and Ericsson in Sweden, you've got this lovely cafeteria with people serving you in gourmet sandwiches. So it's not that. It's the total other end of the scale. How would you get involved? Are you interested in getting involved in that kind of solution space?
So I can tell you based on my experience, we worked a lot in that area of manufacturing and remote sites first, and of course, the company that I represent has a lot of businesses. Like large part of or majority of the business is in that space. That's how B2B food is concentrated. That's where B2B food market per se is concentrated. I think we tried a bunch of things. So one is obviously you try robotics in terms of the production of food. You get robotics involved in the production of food, and that gives you that levy of at the last minute production, as in you prepare the whole thing, and the last minute production you can definitely use an extra hand as a I think that robotics is one use case in that area, and the second use case that we explored in terms of providing the food service to these employees, and I think in most cases, one key challenge that as corporate, as a food service provider that you face is that how do you ensure that everybody gets fed, and how many people, for example, are getting fed at a specific time, and how do I keep count of that and stuff like that. So counting and production was the two use cases that we tackled in the area, and the counting use case was very interesting, that because you can now with the very advanced technology, we also use IoT in terms of we used visual technology, which is basically a camera based counting devices. We used some other IoT devices which can detect the SIM card presence of a specific person. We also use tap and go kind of environment in which you can count based on an employee entering, tapping it. There are a bunch of use cases in terms of counting that we tried with the various technologies, and of course from a production point of view, robotics is a very important and still not as matured use case as we would want it to be, but it's a fair maturity level that we can start to use it. So do you see other use cases than that in this space, other than production and counting?
We have a huge market that we're trying to reach out at. I mean, we're doing smart dispensing, so it's packageless dispensing as well. So we're looking at high volume, because we got very, very low margins. If you're distributing rice and oats, your margins are small, so you need volumes. So we're looking at exactly that on the mining industry. That's the first contact we're having. And like I say, it's 3,000 people. So it would be one breakfast for 3,000 people as a concept. And we're linking to, with an IoT device, to one of these things, your little employee cards. So each person gets a breakfast. So you go tap, it dispenses your breakfast. We know you've eaten. We know we've reached you. All those questions that you were talking about is counting in production. We've got all of that because it's on your payslip. But then we have other markets. So we're looking at two markets. So the bottom end of the market is doing packageless dispensing in the indigent communities throughout Johannesburg at the moment as a start. So a person, I mean, we buy rice, 50 kilogram bag of rice, and we put it into the dispenser, and we can then dispense rice at the price per volume of a 50 kilogram bag for 100 grams worth of rice. You know, the biggest chunk of the cost of 100 grams worth of rice is the packet the thing comes in. So chuck the packet and you save a lot of costs. So a person will come in with their lunchbox and they'll get a cup of rice for R2.50 and they can feed their family for R2.50. So that's another one of our markets. And the last market then is the very, very high end. In South Africa, we call them the life standards measure, and it's on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being indigent and 10 being you're the richest person in the world, you're Bill Gates. So that would be looking at the 7, 8, 9, 10 life standard measure scale. And it's gluten-free oats, roasted almonds, all that kind of sort of boutique dry food. So you'll be able to go into one of our stores is called Nude Foods. So they've got 0 packaging throughout the whole shop. You go in with your Tupperware and you say, I want 500 milliliters of oat milk, or I want, 250 grams of gluten-free oats. But like I say, that's at the very top end. So there's the 2 markets, and we're branching out into the corporate world as well. We're just trying to find out, where do people spend a lot of time and effort on plastic, and how can we assist? And that's the thing with the 3,000 guys eating lunch after a mining shift. They all get a sandwich or whatever wrapped in plastic, and we're going, what's the point? You don't need the plastic. The plastic is just a cost that's irrelevant. So that's Mark, that's what we do.
Got it. So Mark, your solution, you give a complete end-to-end solution in terms of the raw material to the whole.
We supply the rice, the oats, the whatever to the device and the device itself, and then of course it connects into the cloud. So we've got how much are you selling, at what time you're selling, what is your average basket size, all that kind of stuff is all living in Mr. Google.
Got it. And you sell it to both grocery stores as well as to large corporates and like mining companies.
Correct.
All kinds of formats. Okay.
Yeah. We've even sold it to gyms. We have the Virgin Active gym in Johannesburg. So gym members can take their gym member tag and they can get 50 grams of whey protein before their workout. They tap it and it gets put onto their monthly bill, and then they can have a post-exercise, what do you call it, isotonic drink mix, whatever it is, and we're just essentially doing that. So essentially anywhere where you don't need a package that you can dispense ready-made food, liquids. We've actually talking to P&G as well. P&G want us to do washing powder in the Middle East. So the idea is you can go and order 200 grams of Ariel washing powder for your daily consumption instead of having to buy the package.
Got it. So you're replacing the whole
anything that you can dispense.
Got it. So you're replacing the whole CPG, the whole consumer packaged good. You are kind of disrupting that space.
Exactly. Yeah. What P&G call it is the first moment of truth, and they find that their packages are getting bigger and bigger and bigger to compete with the other washing powders. So that when you walk down the shopping aisle, you see the P&G Ariel is bigger and better and brighter than the package next to it. So therefore, you supposedly buy P&G. But we're saying if you have a whole experience around it with a device, a smartphone, bring your own package, it changes the first moment of truth process completely. But that's why we're not going for the middle tier of the market, because the middle tier is your soccer moms. They're worried about school fees, getting their kids to the soccer games. They're running around, they're putting out fires of a family nature on a day-to-day basis, so they're not price conscious. The top of the market are plastic conscious. The bottom of the market are price conscious. So we're using those as the lowest hanging fruit as a start.
Got it. That's great. All the best.
The story came out nicely. I've been practicing it to death for the last 3 months.
Mark, can I? Mark, this is Manish. I'm from Dubai. It's quite an interesting concept, what you're mentioning. Just a quick thing. Do you have any kind of this thing for the ready-made products like sandwiches, wraps, and things like that as well, or no? It's only for.
Not yet. We're nearly there. What's it called? Nestle and Mondelez have asked us to look at things like distributing Oreo cookies. So you have a tube full of Oreo cookies and you can tap your phone with a smart pay solution and just get one Oreo cookie and put it in schools. That's going to be phase 3. We're going to start doing that kind of stuff. We've also had questions for, can you do like an apple? Can somebody, can you put this in a school and can you do one sandwich, one apple, one item of produce? So we're going to look at investigating that from July because we're having lots of requests for it. Yeah.
I love to connect with you. I don't know how I can do it through
LinkedIn. How about that?
All right. No worries.
I'll put my contact in. I can send a comment, can't I?
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, please put it in the comment and then maybe you guys can connect.
Yeah,
definitely. Would love to.
Meanwhile, I think we have a question from Sagar. Sagar, you can put on your mic and maybe ask the question.
Hey, hi Rajiv, hi Ankur. So this is Sagar here. So I run a very early stage startup in bringing health and eco-conscious foods directly from farm gate to consumers. We are largely a D2C, a digital first brand, but we are looking at exploring B2B options as well. So my question to Ankur, I think Mark put it very well on the solutions of personalization and customization and technologies of delivery to the consumer are the trend that are catching up in D2C or B2C space. So Ankur, if you can let me know, or if you have had any use cases that you have worked or even thinking to work on drawing parallels to this customization, or maybe customization is one, convenience and delivery. These are the B2C things that we have seen in a large extent. So are you working on any use cases which are parallel to these in B2B spaces using your technologies?
Sure. So I think all the use cases that you mentioned, Sagar, are quite interesting in this space. I think these use cases are going to be very interesting for I think even in the B2B space example. Right now, with the low audience, let's say in the workplace, especially the white collar workplace, I think the use cases which are in focus are slightly different that would be like in 6 months from now. And but yeah, I think logistics and customization, and also in terms of, so customization is again going back to the trend of providing or empowering the end consumer to choose what they want and how they want it, right? And then it's interesting that we look at it from the lens of customization, but I think it is going to be much more beyond customization. And of course, from a traceability perspective, or sourcing, even sourcing of the food is going to be impacted by how the consumer expects their food to be. But I think all of these trends are very relevant to the day, and I think once we have a bit of recovery, hopefully later this year, I think these use cases will become the key to manage in this space, of course. But I may not have any relevant examples at this point of time, for you that we are working on. But yeah, I think that the focus will become some of these use cases in the near future. But we may not be actively, and especially because I moved out of India and not actively working in the Indian space right now. I would not be very sure if these use cases are being actively worked on.
Okay, great. So I think we can take one last question before we wrap up. Anybody, any last question, comment, or observation on the food tech space? So Vishal, your question or your observation?
Yeah, hi. My name is Vishal. I am in the ideation phase. So, generally people start getting ready for lunch, typically, lunch or dinner whenever they are in their office. This is primarily at the white collar segment, typically like an hour before they're supposed to go for their lunch break or whatever. So what we plan to do is we plan to create a live streaming channel wherein we will kind of have chefs who will kind of cook up some recipes, and this will be like 15-20 minute kind of sessions wherein, and this will be available on the mobile app, which is like on the intranet, something like that. And the employees have a chance to kind of order those, and the pantry or the cafeteria will directly receive that order based on the if someone likes that's what the chef is cooking up. Say someone's preparing dosa, for example, then they will have an order now button which will kind of shoot a order to the cafeteria or to the kitchen, which will kind of keep it ready when the person steps out for lunch. And at the time of placing the order, the order will be placed, and it will be kind of it will be kind of linked to the employees whatever benefits account or whatever. And this would give employees that break as well, like because they already start getting restless and start thinking about food. So this will actually translate that emotional need of connecting with the food and kind of taking a break or taking a break before lunch hour, and ordering delicacies. This will not just be like a standard food, but this will be like slightly high end kind of thing, wherein you want to try out something different and stuff, because everybody gets bored of eating the same food every day. So this was a use case. I just wanted to get the panelists thought on do you think that this is kind of a viable option? Do you kind of agree with the thesis, or do you think it's something that's not required and won't scale?
Yeah.
So I'll give my two bits, Vishal. So thanks for sharing this. I think it's a very interesting idea. I wouldn't comment on the viability because it depends on what kind of target audience and what kind of ecosystem that you will be targeting per se. Obviously this kind of concept is very difficult to sell to a space where let's say a manufacturing driven workplace. It's a very difficult idea to sell. For example, if your target audience is like, as Mark mentioned, 0 to 10, if your target audience is like 7, 8, 9, 10, or probably just 8, 9, 10, the most wealthiest and people who are involved much more in the right at the stage of production in their food, and they want to see how exactly the food is prepared. Yes, why not? But I do see challenges in terms of let's say scaling it up. But of course, this idea would be interesting to some customers. Now, we will have to see in terms of where do we find more of these customers or more of these consumers in one space that they are all interested in. Or this can be, it can be a good B2C channel as well, which could exist for the larger audience to place the order. But definitely, I think it is something interesting. I have not experienced this use case before. In some or the other way, maybe, but I think as you put it, it is a very unique proposition. But yeah, it will need to be piloted as we see it, and then based on the pilot, we will have to get the learnings and then decide on whether this is something viable or whether this is something that the clients or consumers are really interested in. That would be my two bits.
Cool, thanks. Actually, I was targeting the kind of organizations where there are actually culinary teams which are kind of preparing recipes and stuff, because and so somebody who worked in say IKEA and who worked in the Google kitchen in the US and in Japan, they actually told me that this can also lead to reduction in wastage, because typically kitchens tend to kind of make a lot of things, but with this curated kind of a concept, you are kind of reducing the number of SKUs. So that can also have an cost savings, because you're making less, because you're giving the consumer a fewer options, and you're compensating by creating a visual connect between the creator, the food, and the consumer. So that's a feedback which I got from somebody who was like a culinary operations director at IKEA and in Google and things like that. So anyways, but thanks for your feedback. I appreciate it.
Definitely. Thank you.
Great. So we shall be in touch. Maybe just be in touch, and we might have few areas where we can do some quick pilots for that. So are you still in the idea stage, or you're kind of working on some
Actually, I am working with somebody. Like I said, the person whom I'm speaking to, he's ex Compass Group, and he used to lead large kitchens. And my father himself was an executive chef on the flight kitchen side. So I kind of have some background, but obviously it's still in the idea stage where you're kind of drawing up the blueprint on how this will work, figuring out the tech, because we intend to not do it on a B2C right now. We want to test it in B2B because I think that's a much narrower use case. So right now it's early, but yeah, I'll definitely reach out to you at the right time.
Sure. Let's be in touch.
Thanks.
Okay, great. I think thanks all of you for joining us, and thanks Ankur for joining us from Ireland. I think we will pick your brain one more time sometime soon. While we are launching the Foodtech Accelerator, we are creating a Foodtech Accelerator fund with Venture Catalyst. It will be a 15 crore fund to invest in Foodtech startups, both who are working on the Foodtech part, or as well as the technology part with computer vision, tracing, and all of that stuff. So we'll be in touch, and thanks all of you. Thanks Ankur, and all the best.
Thank you. Thanks, Rajiv. Thanks for having me. It was wonderful talking to you, and I look forward to hear from you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for organizing this.
Thank you.
Thanks all of you.